Been 21 days since the disappearance of Nicola Bulley. Police said she had significant issues with alcohol, which was brought on by her ongoing struggles with menopause. Detectives say the 45-year-old was listed as a high-risk missing person due to a number of what they called at the time specific vulnerabilities. But have the police done enough, or have they failed Nicola? Joining me now is former Met Detective Peter Bleksley and the psychologist Emma Kenny. Good morning, both. Great to see you. Peter, you have an expert assessment on how this investigation has been going. We're 21 days in. It looks like they've got no more answers. Is this looking to you like a disastrous investigation?
Well, in terms of Lancashire's constabulary communication with both the media and the public, it has been absolutely woeful. Every time they've stridently said, don't speculate during a press conference, all they've done is open the doors for people to do exactly that by their clumsy use of language and their miscommunications. And of course, yesterday was the primest example of
So
that.
could it be, Peter, that they have done the right things, they've been looking in the right places, but they haven't messaged it correctly to the public?
Quite possibly, although a lot of people reasonably are saying, why are they so wedded to this idea that Nicola went in the water? Because they are still yet to give us the evidence to tell us what it is that made them so convinced that that was their primary strategy. And remember, yesterday, they once again said there is no evidence of any criminal activity or any third-party involvement.
Emma Kenny, here's my theory. It's not about what's happened to Nicola, because I think it's completely inappropriate to speculate about that. But my theory of what might have happened with the police is that perhaps she has these notes on her record that they visited the home in January. We don't know the details of that particular visit by effectively a social worker, a community support officer, and perhaps the police. And from there, perhaps they've made an assumption. This is clearly somebody who was in a position to take her own life, and they've just focused on the river. The detail they announced yesterday about the drinking and the menopause, for me, was nothing short of extraordinary and shocking. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I'd mirror that, because there's 13 million women on average going through the menopause in the UK at this moment in time. And a lot of those will, for example, drink a little more than usual and feel more vulnerable. And they're not just disappearing every single day. There would be a whole deficit in our population if that were the case. But I think that it's helpful for the police to be able to hang on to that, so that some of, as was just noted, the failures that I do think the speculation have started to actually have some reasonable explanation for, such as they didn't cordon off the area and so on and so forth. And there are lots of things that I've listened to where police officers have come out and talked about that from their prior experience. And I'm afraid that I do think what they're trying to do is deflect a little bit. And it's just not read the room at all, Bev, because what we know is there is a woman missing, irrespective of whether there were vulnerabilities, which we all have with respect. She's missing. And the primary focus is, how do we bring her home? Not how do we take highly confidential information and exploit that to our benefit. And that's what people are feeling. I have a father who took his own life. I'm very aware that when people go missing, they have to be clear about vulnerabilities. Fine. Well, that didn't happen a few weeks ago. That wasn't expressed. This is a latter explanation for behaviours that I think come down to failures.
Peter, it seems obviously the police knew at the beginning of this investigation that these notes were in the history of that particular family. Do you think it might have affected how they treated it? Or should they have gone maybe public with that earlier? The professional diver who was brought onto the scene to help said he didn't even know about that. He was talking on Breakfast on GB News this morning, saying if you'd given me that information, I would have looked for her in a different way.
Clearly, there's been an attempt to suppress this information, which is astonishingly naive. The family must be talking to the police, and I would strongly suspect that the police have been trying to give them some advice with regards to the media. Well, my advice would be never take any media advice from Lancashire Constabulary, because if this is an example of their work, they clearly don't know very much at all about how to handle information, when to divulge it, what to divulge, and of course, if you don't trust the messaging, you're not going to trust the investigation.
Emma, that word trust is absolutely critical here, isn't it? In your experience, you've worked with families, as you say yourself, you very sadly lost your father to this, to suicide. I imagine that the relationship between the family and the police officers who will be in and out of their house at this time is absolutely critical.
It's paramount, and I do feel that the family and the friends have had some real frustrations from the get-go. When you have a human being in your world that is just the most priceless individual, and they're lost, they've disappeared, and the reality is there is no explanation. You know, she could have drowned, she could have taken her own life, she could have been abducted. These are all possibilities, and yet it feels like there was a bias, and we all know about psychological bias. Confirmation bias is, I believe this, I need to confirm it. The problem with that is the police's job, as was just absolutely accurately described, is to essentially look at all avenues of investigation, to close nothing off, and also forensically to be on high alert. And I think that the public, as much as there's a lot of criticism about people making these assumptions and armchair detectives, it comes down to something when those armchair detectives are actually talking about police protocol that is essentially factual and correct, and that seems to have been, shall we say, not necessarily in line where this investigation has been concerned.
Peter, some people are now speculating, with hope actually, and it's the optimistic assessment might be that Nicola just decided in a state of mental crisis that she could no longer live this life and has escaped. She's gone somewhere. How likely is that?
Well, the police have told us that there is a pathway up towards Garstang Road, which they cannot be 100% convinced that Nicola hasn't passed through that way because there's not sufficient CCTV. So there is always the possibility that their working hypothesis, their theory that Nicola went into the water might not actually be what actually happened. But we shall have to wait and see. Of course, everybody longs for a satisfactory resolution to this, but sadly, as time goes on, I think that more and more unlikely.
What would you be doing now, Peter, if you were in charge of this investigation now? I know you would have done things differently perhaps from day one, but if you were to step into this now, what would your strategy be?
Well, having sacked the media team this morning, which would have been the first thing to do if I ruled the Lancashire Constabulary, I would once again be trying to put the genie back into the bottle in certain regards in trying to regain public confidence, because we know there are still motorists that passed along that road that may have dash cam footage, for example, that may have seen something. And so to get the public confidence and trust back, I would be appealing to those people and really trying to repair the damage that has been done. But it's been so catastrophic now that I fear that simply might never be achieved.
Well, we've all got our fingers crossed for a positive resolution to this story, haven't we? Thank you both so much, Peter Bleksley and Emma Kenny.